The Rocket Review is sponsored by Why Not Saloon.
We're so pleased to have on the show. He's a singer, songwriter, keyboardist, you name it. Oh, besides that, being a record executive and author. We've got Eddie DeGarmo on the show. Eddie, it's so nice to have you in.
Good to be here, Eric.
Well, it's after your publicist pestered me. Oh, that was your wife.
That was my wife.
And she did not pester me, because as soon as she reached out, I'm like going, I think I know Eddie. Was he with DeGarmo and Key?
Back in the day.
That's the one.
Back in the day, baby.
It's like you're still so current, and we got to bring this up too, with Unsung Hero, the movie out now. You're depicted in this movie several times, and I got to tell you, the guy that is portraying you, his hair looks amazing, just like yours did.
It's pretty weird, to be honest, to be played by somebody else in a movie.
Right.
And
a pretty big star.
And I didn't really, his name's Jonathan Jackson that played it, and there's some photos that people can find and that sort of thing. And of course the movie's in theaters and doing pretty good business.
Very good.
Doing pretty good business. It's all over the country, and in Canada, they haven't released it worldwide, but as you can imagine, I've heard from a lot of my friends.
Oh, yeah.
Like, Eddie, this is hilarious.
It has to be surreal, though, for you, especially with the storied music career you've had, Eddie, and we're going to dig into things. But to see someone portraying you in a movie it's a lot of it's based on how you discovered Rebecca and really brought her forward with her music. And in fact, it's interesting also that she wrote a blurb for the back of your book, too.
Small worlds.
No coincidence there.
Small world.
What is it like to see someone else play you and the things that you contributed to her career with this family?
Well, the movie follows the Smallbone family. And the Smallbone family story is their father was a fairly prominent concert promoter in Australia.
Right.
That during their big recession lost everything, went bankrupt. And came to Nashville with his 6 children and his pregnant wife with the promise of a job from a certain company, and got here and it fell through. Now, he lost his house. They lost everything they had in Australia, so when they got here, they had nothing.
Wow.
Right, nothing. And they were in this little house somewhere down south of town and just kind of had to make their way. And the way that I got engaged with them is they knocked on my door one day, the dad and 3 of the sons,
right,
and said, hey, we've got a lawn care company, can we take care of your grass?
Yeah.
And I noticed the accent, but I didn't know David Smallbone, although I'd spoken to him, but I didn't know him. And so I said, well, tell me your story. Well, we're new to America, we're the Smallbone family. And I said, David Smallbone, right? And he said, yes. And I said, well, that's the only one I know. So I could tell something was up with them. They had fallen on hard times.
Right.
So Susan and I hired them first to take care of our yard work.
Wow.
Down south in Franklin.
Yeah.
And then Helen, the mother, which she's really the one that the movie is about. She is the unsung hero.
Right, right.
She was the glue that kept it going during those tough years. And Helen showed up with Rebecca, their 14-year-old daughter, said, hey, we clean houses. Do you need somebody to clean your house? Again, Susan and I knew that something was going on there, and so we hired them just to help them, really.
How amazing.
So Helen and Rebecca cleaned our house. I had no idea she could even sing. Now, in those days, I had founded an independent record company called Forefront Records. We had signed a couple of very successful artists like DC Talk and Audio Adrenaline and several Skillet, several others. And
also on the back of the book.
Yeah, and so I didn't know Rebecca was a singer. That kind of revealed itself over the next few months. Wow. Right. So that's how I got engaged in the Smallbone family story. And so I signed her to Forefront.
Right.
I went and saw her, saw a showcase. That's depicted in the movie too.
Right.
Pretty funny.
Right.
And, signed her to do records. And probably the first thing I said to her, which is also in the movie, and this is pretty funny. I said, I don't know if I can sell a Smallbone in America. So how about let's change your name?
Right.
And so I changed her name.
That is so rock and roll.
You know, and it started out, I said, how about St. John? She goes, I don't, Olivia Newton-John, she's Australian, that's a little weird for me. So she came back and she goes, how about St. James? I said, sounds good to me. Let's do it.
Amazing.
So that's that story.
Well, I'll tell you what, in your career too, it's so interesting, Eddie, you know, and knowing your music, and you and I were talking about Nashville and everything, but with, you know, DeGarmo and Key, you know, a duo, a band that you were with for 17 years. And I mean, you were raised in Memphis, Tennessee before you got here to Nashville, but really a pioneer of contemporary Christian music.
I was the Forrest Gump of Christian music.
No,
what
I mean,
was.
but I don't
So
think people,
I
a lot of
was.
people don't remember though, Eddie, that's like when you guys first started doing this, it was kind of like, wait a minute, what are you doing with this, with Christian rock and roll music?
That was 1972.
Yeah.
You know, I signed my first record contract when I was 15, Eric. Yeah, I was 15 years old, and we were signed to a major called London Records. They had the Rolling Stones, they had Eddie Money, they had ZZ Top.
Right.
You know, and they had our little band called Globe in those days. And I grew up almost literally right across the street from Graceland. Used to hang around there a lot because Elvis had 3 stepbrothers, Ricky, Billy, and David in those years.
Yeah.
Elvis's father, Vernon, had married a lady in Germany that had 3 sons. And so I was friends with those boys, went to school with them for 12 years. And so we ran around Graceland. They wouldn't let me do it when Elvis was there.
Right.
So I've been through all that stuff.
How incredible.
Dozens of times.
Right.
And I've got some pretty cool Elvis stories, and I know Graceland's all in the news.
Oh, totally.
Or has been because
Right.
it, you know, at least
Almost being sold.
Yeah, being sold. So, you know, I trick-or-treated from Elvis Presley on Halloween.
I don't think a lot of people can say that,
when I
Eddie.
was like 6 maybe.
Yeah.
And here's the funny part of the story. Elvis signed a dollar bill for me with a magic marker that was pre-Sharpie days. So
Yeah.
he signed it with a magic marker.
That's even better than full-size candy bars.
Yeah. Guess what I did?
What?
I spent it the next day.
Of course
What's
you
that
did.
whole, you know, when
You
you're
were a
sick,
kid.
when you're, you know,
Yeah, you don't get it.
That'll buy you some candy, man.
Plus, he's next door. It's like, yeah, so, you know.
So, you know, I had 2 or 3 interactions with Elvis through the years, and he was really more of a star of my big brother's generation. I was more into the, you know, the Beatles and the Stones and the Who, and,
Yeah.
you know, and all those kinds of groups when I grew up. But I came to be a great respecter of Elvis Presley when I figured out what had happened and how avant-garde he was in 1953
Right.
when he came on the scene.
Cutting edge.
You know, wearing a pink sport coat and, you know, an eyeliner. So,
Right.
pretty crazy
Yeah.
coming from Memphis. So,
And then obviously with your career, with the incredible hair that you had.
I had a lot of hair. Well, a lot of us had a lot of hair in those years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you guys were on the cover of like all the magazines. I
Had
mean,
a lot of
all
hair.
the talk. I mean, you know, so many, you know, and you were talking about, you know, Skillet, like with John Cooper and Toby Mac, who also wrote, you know, forward for your book. It's like so many contemporary Christian music artists, you know, associate themselves with you guys from what DeGarmo and Key did back then.
I was a senior in high school when I made a commitment to follow Jesus. And I went to church, first time I'd been in a number of years, because our band, you know, we were kind of known for being risque and stuff, but most bands were, right? And so my brother that came back from the service during the Vietnam War took me to a church service, and I saw something I had never seen before. I saw a guy playing guitar in church.
Yeah.
His name was Dallas Holm. And Dallas came and talked to me after the guy that spoke that night. He was kind of known in those days, named David Wilkerson, which actually wrote books against my music. Pretty funny later on. But I asked Dallas, I said, am I going to have to quit my rock band? You know, that was my my life.
Sure.
You know, that was my life. And he said to me, Eddie, I don't know the answer to that, but you got to be willing to.
Right.
That's what he said.
Yeah.
I thought it was a pretty good answer.
That's a very good answer.
And so over the next 3 or 4 months, I could see that it was very oil and water with the band.
Right.
Now, I went back to school the next day. I was a senior, about to graduate. It was in March 1972. Graduated the first week of May. And I saw my friend Dana Key. And I said, Dana, you're not going to believe what happened to me yesterday, man. I found Jesus. And his comment was perfect.
Yeah.
I didn't know he was missing, man. So it gets better. We skipped school.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
I said, well, I need to tell you about this. So we skipped school. And turned out, you know, he was going through the same kind of things I was going through. And so he made a commitment to Jesus that day while we skipped school, which is kind of a weird concept when you think about it. But so, you know, over the next few months, it seemed that, you know, we weren't in sync with our band.
Right.
So we left our band, and London Records said, well, hey, you know, we want to be a part of what you're doing, so we want to know what you're about.
Right.
You know, in the next part of the music. We just started writing songs about our faith. We had no clue that it was Jesus rock or contemporary Christian music.
Right.
We were two hippie kids from Memphis just writing about our faith. So we tried playing in bars. And when we would talk about Jesus in bars, sometimes things would get thrown at us.
It was like the Blues Brothers.
Right, it was very similar.
You're behind chicken wire.
So we said, well, hey, let's try it in churches. We got more stuff thrown at us.
But fortunately, they didn't have bottles.
More stuff. I mean, I've had cabbages and tomatoes thrown at me. And I tell those stories to people that I worked with, and, you know, through the years, like John Foreman from Switchfoot, or John Cooper from Skillet, or Toby Mack, you know, or just all these different folks that I worked with through the years. I tell them those stories, and they're like, "You're kidding me." And I said, "No, that was the early days."
Right. Because people didn't get it. Because I remember in the early 80s here in Nashville to where it was still, you know, and that was, you know, a decade after you guys had already started doing it. And it was still like, wow, this Christian contemporary music is really catching on fire.
You know, somebody asked me once, they said, why did you play Jesus rock music? And I said, it was never really a decision. It kind of, you know, we grew up playing in rock bands.
Right.
And so when we, you know, found faith in our lives, we just started writing, because that's what writers do.
Exactly.
They write about what's important to them. So we just started writing songs about our faith, and then everybody else said, well, that's like Jesus rock music, right? You know?
Yeah.
And then we made some demos, and London Records heard the demos, and they were like, man, we like this music, but we don't know how to sell this.
It wouldn't fit in a box.
Yeah, how are we going to sell this stuff? You know?
Yeah.
So it was a few years later that Pat Boone got a hold of
Great picture with you and Pat in here also.
Got a hold of one of our tapes, and Mike Kerb, which is, his name's on all the buildings over at Belmont.
Yes, it is. They had on Music Row.
They had a record company called Lamb and Lion. You know, famously Kerb tells the story, you know, that Pat was the lamb and he was the lion. And so they said, we think we can help you. Right. So they recorded our first several albums on us, and our first album was released in January of 1978. Wow. So it took about 6 years and getting thrown out of a lot of places before a record came out.
And then you end up heading up, you know, record labels and publishing companies and all these great things you've done in your career, which are also in your book, which is still available now, Rebel for God, which I told you, Eddie, I think you're going to have to update it. And this needs to be a documentary unto itself. And you've certainly appeared on several documentaries in the past few years, but your life story is an amazing,
kind of you to say.
It just is. I mean, you know, peaks and valleys. It's like from great things happening to things bottom out.
Well, I mean, you know, I've been asked a lot of times, well, how did you get in the music business? Well, I mean, I grew up playing music, but Susan and I, my lovely wife, which is now, I hear she's my publicist.
And a very good one.
Got me on this job, got me this job with you. So Susan and I were married young, and we had children pretty much 9 months and 5 minutes after we got married.
Right.
So pretty much, right? Right. She'll kill me when she hears that I said that on, you know, this. But so I got hurt in an accident, and I was hospitalized and had to have back surgery at age 21 years old.
Oh my gosh.
And the doctors thought that I had a really good chance to be paralyzed. And it was during that time when it became clear to me that, you know, it's kind of like, you know, people think they hear things from God from time to time, but it was like I heard God say to my heart, I'm not saying it was an audible voice, but I heard him say, Eddie, you got nothing to lose anymore.
Right.
Because you've lost it all.
Right.
You know, you're laying in a hospital bed. You know, you're living with my parents because we lost our little house we lived in. We lost everything we had.
Yeah.
And so Susan, I talked to her and said, "What do you think about us starting this Christian band back together?" And you know, Pat Boone and I didn't know who Mike Curb was. He'll kill me when he hears me say that too. But Pat Boone, he was still, you know, on Johnny Carson in those days. He was a big deal. So they want to help us. And she said, "Daddy," she said, "you know, we have nothing more to lose.
Right.
We've lost it all." I mean, we were on every government assistance program, which thank God for those. They helped us. But we were on every one that you can imagine. So fast forward 25 years later, and you know, I've had a successful career making music, and I've got a successful, you know, record company, and then I sold that record company to a global EMI was what it was called, and EMI now is part of Universal Music, but sold it to them and went to work for Capitol, and spent the last 25 years of my career working for Capitol, running their faith-based publishing business. So
you just keep going, and next thing you know, you're in a movie like Unsung Hero.
Well, yeah, pretty funny.
Yeah, I don't think you're ever going to get to retire, Eddie, and I think you do need to update the book to include Unsung Hero. You know, you might have to use a computer this time instead of legal pads, but I know that the book is available on your website, and so people can buy it and get an autographed copy like mine, which I'm thrilled to have.
You can get it on Amazon. There's audio book. It's pretty much all around. So.
And so we can watch for the documentary also. I want to make sure, I mean, do you still have, you know, your website and everything going?
Oh yeah, EddieDeGarmo.com. There you go. And you'll see pictures of me that you'll like, is that the same guy?
And you'll see him on the movie, Unsung Hero. You know, he will not be portraying himself, but he easily could. I'll tell you, a great book. Be sure and check it out, Rebel for God. What an incredible career, Eddie. And it's just a thrill to have you on the show after listening to your music for so many years. Really to have you here in person, to be able to show the audience, you know, to watch the show. It's like, Eddie's still around. He's still doing good stuff.
Yeah, I'm still kicking.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming on, Eddie.
Thank you.
The Rocket Review is sponsored by Why Not Saloon.